McLaren made a massive gamble when deciding to replace Daniel Ricciardo with an inexperienced rookie, Oscar Piastri. But even though the Woking outfit has been criticized for making the move, it's still perfectly happy with the risk it's taken. Now, it doesn't take a genius to figure out why putting a rookie in your car is risky.
I'm here at my first F1 test, super excited. Bit nervous as well. I think that's pretty normal, but after the first lap,
especially when you're replacing a driver who's got a decade of experience under his belt.
Daniel Ricciardo has returned to the top step of the podium in a dramatic race here this afternoon in the sunshine of Monza. The sparkling wine.
But for McLaren, this was always going to be a make-or-break move. After all, you don't get a talent like Piastri in the pool very often. Oh, and let's not forget, everyone had their eyes on the young Aussie. I mean, Alpine even published a statement saying they'd signed him for the 2023 season. So even though this was a gamble, it was definitely one worth taking. That being said, you can't help but wonder if Ricciardo could have improved in that seat next year. Sure, he has had 2 years to prove himself.
Alonso ahead of his teammate, but for how much longer? He goes wide, Alonso. That could allow Ricciardo to slip down the inside. Daniel Ricciardo picks off both of them during the course of a couple of corners.
But it's not like he had the best car underneath him. Plus, there's the whole issue of terminating his contract as well.
We tried quite long as a collective to try and make this work and get the car in a place I was happy with, to get the most out of myself and to find those results.
After all, the amount of money you've got to pay to cut ties with a high-profile driver like that is insane.
Forces Daniel Ricciardo the long way round or into the little switcheroo here. He's got very good traction coming out of turn 1. He's going to have to live with a Ferrari all the way around turn 2. He is ahead, Daniel Ricciardo.
I guess the point I'm trying to make is that McLaren is hedging a lot of its bets on Piastri. And if he doesn't turn out to be an instant hit for the team, then things could spiral real quick, though they seem to have full confidence in him. In fact, McLaren thinks Piastri is a generational talent, and to be fair, that's not an inaccurate assessment.
The moment has arrived for the Prema man. Oscar Piastri wins the Formula 2 Championship of 2021. 3 titles in a row for the Australian driver.
Seriously, all you've got to do is look at the Aussie's record in junior categories to see just how good he is.
Put in all the hard work, so they 100% deserve it. And yeah, now it's just time to get my title.
The guy won the Formula Renault Eurocup, Formula 3, and Formula 2 championships in 3 consecutive seasons. That sort of progression is almost unheard of in motorsport.
Now Oscar Piastri, they rate him incredibly highly.
Oscar, F2 champion. Talk me through your emotions standing here right now.
So he's gonna fit right in with some of the other young stars in the sport, like George Russell, Charles Leclerc, and of course, Lando Norris. Besides, even the ex-team principal, Andreas Seidel, called him a very special talent.
In the junior categories, that he's something very special and has a lot of potential. Plus, I think also in terms of personality, I think he's a perfect fit into our team, and
he's just one of those drivers who are very confident in their ability and yet manage to keep their heads down and remain humble. Plus, he's clearly here to win and not just compete in the midfield for the next decade. The point is, even though it may seem like he's a rookie, you could say he's already a finished product. Not to mention, he's already driven the car a bunch of times during tests.
So I've had my first day in Papaya, a lot of laps, very cool day. Nice to be back out again finally. And yeah, learnt a lot.
And of course, he'll have plenty of time to get accustomed to his new environment over the upcoming tests as well. But if you've still got doubts over his ability to fit in and succeed at McLaren, then let me tell you about the one person who could convince you to think otherwise: Lando Norris. Yep, even though pairing Piastri with the Brit seems like a risky move, especially because it'll make McLaren the youngest team on the grid, it still makes perfect sense. After all, Norris has plenty of experience under his belt despite only being 23.
Place ahead of Charles Leclerc.
Lando Norris on the podium. Superb, absolutely superb. Through the Ravazza, he heads up to the line. He'll be very happy with that. That will motivate everyone at McLaren.
On top of that, he's just incredibly mature on the racetrack and rarely makes a mistake. So in a way, he's already behaving like an old, experienced driver on the team. And this significantly decreases the risk of putting Piastri next to him. In fact, I think the Aussie could learn a thing or two from him. After all, he does know how to bring the best out of that car. Plus, he could be a frame of reference for Oscar as well, as he gave gauges where he needs to be in terms of his overall pace. Oh, and let's not forget that Norris emphatically defeated Danny Ricciardo for 2 seasons straight, which isn't something that should be taken lightly. Speaking of Ricciardo, though, you can't help but think if he's been hard done by here. I mean, getting replaced by a rookie probably didn't feel great, but the Honey Badger can't blame anyone else for his demise. And fair play to him, he hasn't done that either. It's just that there's been this narrative around his sacking that McLaren was perhaps a bit too harsh, or that they pulled the trigger a bit too quickly. Though the fact of the matter is that he just wasn't good enough. Like, you can't even say that he didn't get enough time to gel with the team. He spent 2 full seasons, which should be more than enough for a driver to start performing. Oh, and then getting beaten by such a massive margin was just the icing on the top. The truth is that Ricciardo never really settled into the team. Now, you could debate whether it was the car or just some mental barrier he couldn't climb over, but you can't argue against the fact that Norris was performing consistently in that same car. Plus, even in the race Daniel won at Monza, you could say that the Brit was faster, but he didn't overtake because of team orders. I mean, in some ways, the Australian was one of the sole reasons behind the team slipping down the order, and if he'd been earning nearly as many championship points as his teammate, they probably would have been in a much better position. With that said, it's wild to think just how far he's fallen over the past few years. Like, it hasn't even been that long since that iconic win in Monaco. So what went wrong for Ricciardo? Even McLaren couldn't really figure out that problem. I mean, they would have liked to keep him around if he was at least half decent, but you just can't keep a driver around who's costing you so many points through the course of a season. Then again, there's a possibility that perhaps the car was just not suited to his driving style. I'm not just talking about the overall pace. Over the course of his career, the Honey Badger has always excelled in cars that tend to operate right on the edge. You know, like the Red Bull that tends to oversteer through the corners. McLaren, on the other hand, was perhaps just too tame for him to exercise his racecraft. He couldn't make those dive bomb overtakes through the inside, nor could he push like he wanted to, though he thinks it's got more to do with the fact that he just started overthinking his flaws in the car. And to be fair, he was better when he initially stepped into the team. Maybe there's some truth to be found there as well. At the end of the day, he just wasn't good enough, and McLaren had to let him go. But his departure leaves a pretty big question. What does the future look like for the team now? Well, for starters, they've got arguably one of the most exciting driver pairings on the grid, and even though we shouldn't expect them to win races right away, this is ultimately a step in the right direction. You have a consistent Norris, who will be bringing in the points as always, and while Piastri is an unknown quantity, at least we know he's fast. So let's just say he manages to crash out in a bunch of races and pulls off a Michael Schumacher. You can still bet that he's gonna bring in more points for the team than Ricciardo did. Besides, this is a long-term plan for McLaren. They're not looking for any instant gains right now, and my guess is that in 2 to 3 years' time, we'll finally start to see it all come together for them. Alright, that's it for McLaren's risky move with Piastri, and why it could pay off in the long run. See you in the next one.